The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's weekly Wednesday webinar. Firstly, a big thank you to Shippit, who are sponsoring this webinar and who are also a great partner of the NORA network. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for this session. We have Rob Hangozada, who is co-founder and joint CEO of Shippit, and Mark Tepperson, who is Chief Digital Officer of the Accent Group. So before I pass it on to Rob, just a reminder that you may ask questions throughout this webinar. You can just use the question box down below and we'll answer them as we go. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much, Brittany. So, not quite Paul Greenberg, but a very close and I'd say more improved model and version. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. It's at times not the most riveting format, but you have two of the most riveting speakers I hope you'll see in the webinar format. Obviously, you're here to learn about how you can extend your store capabilities and not lose customers to out-of-stock scenarios. So to help me with that is a man by the name of Mark Tepperson. So obviously I'm joint CEO and I guess director of Shippit.com. We're here to simplify how businesses ship and really how to revolutionize retail in doing so. Mark, I'll let you introduce yourself, mate.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Mark Tepperson. I'm the Chief Digital Officer of the Accent Group. For those that aren't aware of who the Accent Group is, we're the largest footwear retailers in Australia and New Zealand. We are a listed entity in Australia. We have 450 stores, physical stores, across 9 different retail formats, including Athlete's Foot, Hype DC, Platypus, Skechers, Vans, Timberland, and the list does go on.
Awesome. So somebody who knows a little bit about digital and physical retailing, no doubt. Thank you for joining me today, Mark. So as this is a webinar and you want to get something out of it, we do have 4 learning objectives that we'll cover off. So the very first thing that you will learn today is why, I guess, turning stores into mini DCs drives growth for your business. The second thing is how to really look at this initiative in a way that drives retention, improves conversion, and really at the end of the day helps you generate more revenue for your business. The third piece is what in-store capabilities are really needed for ship from store. It's an often talked about concept, but really the journey to unlocking this capability is often the untold story. So giving a bit of insight into that. And the fourth thing is, really what you need to consider when implementing an endless aisle strategy. And really helping me with that today is Mark, and sharing insight in what needs to be true to enable this type of capability. How we'll do that today is across 4 key modules. The first thing is understanding what the case for using physical stores really is, and we call this the burning platform for change. The second piece is a module around what we see as global and local trends, how the humble store is being used for different purposes, and what we see as the future of retailing. The third piece is what are the barriers and the benefits to implementing an endless aisle ship from store program, and often what are the myths that are untold, and how do we actually debunk those myths. And the fourth part is then throwing it back to you, the audience, to answer any questions you might have. Throughout the call, you should have access to a questions panel on your GoToWebinar app. If you want to submit a question at any point in time, Mark and I'd be more than happy to answer them. Just jot your question through, and if we don't have time, during the midst of the presentation, we'll definitely get to them by the end. But please do keep them going. It's a 2-way street. Let's keep the learning alive. The first module is the burning platform for change. If we think about the physical store, there's been a lot of talk about the shifting priority of the store. What is actually going on in retail, lots of different conflicting opinions around the role of the store in the future of retailing. You hear about store closures being pretty prevalent across both Australia and globally in the States specifically. You look at the demise of certain retailers like Toys R Us, you know, it is all a little bit of doom and gloom out in the market today. But we're also seeing a bit of a silver lining in terms of what the store could be used for, because obviously the role of retailing is changing. And as we start to get into this, we start to look at things like footfall decline. It's no secret that visitation to stores has shrunk. If you look at this chart, it indicates the footfall versus retail trade. And what we're seeing here is an absolute decline in footfall across really the 2016 period. And looking at those rates of decline accelerate into 2017. The red line is an interesting one, which looks at the total retail market, you know, in physical retail at least. And the growth rate has shrunk, but it is still in a positive direction. I think, Mark, you've got a little bit more insight around this if you wanted to talk to, you know, I guess that trend of footfall decline, but sales retaining relatively buoyant.
Yeah, I think you know, from a retail perspective, I think what we're seeing is a huge shift in consumer behavior. So there is no doubt, I mean, it's measured that footfall to malls is down. Retail sales are, according to this graph, certainly still positive. So what does that mean? Well, fundamentally, there's less browsing being done in the store. And so when consumers do come to physical retail, it is with a higher expectation to purchase. So for anybody that's running, you know, door counters and doing conversion tracking, you know, I would be surprised if they weren't seeing an upward trend in conversion, but a downward trend in foot traffic. And what that means, though, is that the customers are going further up the funnel to do their research. So what do I mean by that? Is that fundamentally they're doing their research online. And again, I'd encourage you to have a look at your own website traffic and look at the growth that you have had in that traffic, and maybe even measure it against the decline that you're seeing in footfall to malls and possibly your stores. And this fundamentally creates a wonderful opportunity for retailers, because you can capture the intent of a customer further up the funnel and possibly even convert them. So if you know that they're looking online and you have the best assortments and you're in stock, and perhaps you can start thinking about how you use your store inventory to help support that, there are opportunities to actually win the customer earlier on in the consumer journey.
Absolutely, Mark. And I think it also underscores the need to accelerate the experience in store as the customer is looking to get in and get out quite quickly and not necessarily browse as much as they probably once used to.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I think so. The other point there is that, I mean, the way that we describe it is that it's never been more important to delight your customers when they are in store. I think if you consider I mean, the cost of anything, or the value of anything, is the cost of the alternative, right? So if you consider a customer going to a mall today that, you know, average customer lives 20 minutes away from their mall. They look for parking for 10, 15 minutes. They navigate the shopping center. They arrive at your store only to be told that product isn't actually available. You only really have one chance to disappoint the customer before they say it's all too hard, and they do start defaulting to either online behaviors or even off your brand entirely. And so we'll touch on a little bit later in the presentation some strategies and initiatives, but I think the underpinning piece there is that with less foot traffic coming to malls, we've got to make that foot traffic count more and more.
Absolutely, Mark. And I guess if you counter offline sales growth to online sales growth, you know, given the rise in penetration in online buying, obviously we're seeing, you know, online retail sales growth outstripping offline by quite a significant amount. And so what that means for some multi-channel retailers, at least, is the stock turn in the warehouse is doing great, but stock turn in store is actually starting to slow down somewhat. So this really represents a concern around the ROI on the physical asset that we have in the store. Obviously, you know, ways to deal with slower stock turn, you know, and Mark, feel free to jump in, obviously, is unsustainable clearances. So, you know, you see these end of season clearance sales obviously are a strategy for you to clear out stock stock that gets actually moved back from the store into the warehouse, potentially written off because they can't be sold, and obviously transfers from store to store as we're looking at more of an inefficient use of capital being invested in stock in stores.
Yeah, absolutely right, Rob. I think that Accent has quite publicly been out in market since around December last year about this no more lazy retail, which is really a mantra. I mean, we were guilty of store-wide offers every other weekend for a long time. And December last year, we virtually turned all of that off. Certainly, we still have clearances to seasonally purge aged inventory, as all retailers need to do. But we took the hard decision to wean ourselves off the drug. And again, what certainly helped that is the way that we have thought about retail and online and how they are complementing one another. Again, in some of the later slides, we'll unpack how we've done that. But we face the same issues and challenges that every retailer does. No matter how good your planning and allocations team is, the stock's never 100% in the locations that it is, which means that you carry larger, markdowns than you'd otherwise like, and maybe more inventory than you need to. So we really focused on how we could unpack that problem and look to bring in a solution to kind of address those issues.
Thank you, Mark. I guess coupled with that, the reality of the physical asset, kind of, an underlying trend, at least, that we're seeing in our own businesses. I think looking beyond that and looking at customer demand, this is that annoying customer again, right? So we talk about the I want it now customer, and millennials are often given the blame, and there's more insight around that kind of Gen Z, Gen Y type of consumer. But really, if you think about what Uber has started to do to this generation and technologies like Uber, friction should not exist through the purchasing process. So I want to buy it where I am, whenever I want it, and I want it right now. This is not the majority of your customers, but this is a subset of customers that will only grow. I think the statistics say that around 70% of your millennials will actually be in the workforce by 2030, or 70% of the workforce at least will be consisting of millennials. So think about that mindset now and project that out into the future. And we're going to see this become more and more of the demand that is likely to be seen in the market. Mark, did you have any insight on the Gen Z consumer?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work looking at consumer demographics and then their propensity to purchase online. So there's two big shifts that we can see. The first one is looking backwards, which is roughly 3 years ago, Generation Y overtook baby boomers as the largest demographic in market in terms of size, but also in terms of discretionary spend at retail. And what we see in the next 5 years is this rapid rise of Generation Z. So in terms of their size and their discretionary retail spend. Now, what's alarming about that change is that Generation Z, if you look at propensity to purchase online, Generation Z is almost twice as likely to buy online than baby boomers. And about 1.3 times more likely to buy online than Generation Y. So this momentum that we have seen towards online, in my view, is only going to continue to accelerate. And so really, as omni-channel retailers, as retailers with a large bricks and mortar presence, we really needed to rethink how we used our asset base to take advantage of the shift in the consumer behavior, but also kind of make sure that we remained relevant for consumers for the next generation as they kind of move through the system.
Yeah, and I think one of the statistics I read the other day as well, Mark, is, or at least one of the trends that we're seeing in terms of Google search terms is, rather than customers looking for trading hours and looking at when they can buy things, the search terms are a lot more driven by immediacy. So, what stores are open now? What store is closest to me? Can I get this item today? that really is the mindset that the customer is now in. So much so that, if you think about the culprit here, I'm sure many of you on the call today have used Uber Eats. I'd say my dirty little secret is I use it more than once a week, but it's a really convenient service, right? You can go for absolutely starving hungry to, I can't barely move because I'm so full of burgers in about 32 minutes. That's the average wait time on an Uber Eats delivery. The statistic about a year ago was 1 in 5 have used the service. I dare say that's a lot greater today, particularly among that millennial segment. And the average cost of delivery is only $5. Now, we know that that's not the business model of delivery for online retailing, but it does have a psychological impact on the customer in terms of the expectation. Think about how much you're charging for standard delivery today. Call it $5 to $10, call it, 3 to 7 business days. Think about the mindset of the consumer. There's often an adage that I use, which is Stacy doesn't care about your logistics. It doesn't matter where your inventory is located. It doesn't matter how hard it is to get it to the customer. There is a relevant expectation around timeliness of that delivery being shaped by trends like this in market. Obviously, this is the holy grail and not going to be the majority use case, but really it poses the question as to how can we leverage the fact that we have slow stock turn in stores, we have inventory sitting in stores, stores are more proximal to a person, in location than a centralized DC, and this whole trend of on-demand delivery to really bring a formidable force to market. So the second module here is really how retailers are responding globally and locally. I'm sure if you're across the retail press and a lot of the content that we generate, no doubt, stores as fulfillment centers are not a new concept. And if you've even joined a Fluent Retail, webinar before on the same topic, it will sing from the same gospel. But we'll share a little bit of insight around, the case for stores as a fulfillment center. So at a very high level, there are 4 key benefits that we see as the case for change here. So the first thing is obviously greater proximity to customer means faster delivery and lower cost. Lower cost of delivery, we've kind of put labor to the side, but I think we'll get into that in a little bit. The second benefit primarily here is about better stock turn and less clearance is required. So selling more at a profitable margin than having to erode margin to sell stock. The third piece is, or the third key benefit is the ability to offer same-day delivery nationally. Now, obviously, that's something that the Accent Group is doing across their portfolio of brands. We've enabled this for, Harvey Norman across, the national network. And we're also looking at a number of other retailers who are about to go live with the same thing. Q is another great example of same-day delivery nationwide across metro cities. And this is a capability you don't get from shipping centrally out of a DC, and it's something which allows you to sell more at full price and to actually save money on freight and improve conversion. The fourth benefit is endless aisle. And endless aisle as a definition, so that everybody's clear, is about expanding what is accessible to the customer, from being more than just what they physically see in front of them or what's physically available to them online. So that means expanding that range to include inventory that wouldn't otherwise have been available to the customer, be it through dropship, be it through the store network, etc. But for this, primarily is about lighting up the stock that exists within your stores for online purchasing. Zara is a fantastic example. It was a little bit late to the party, but it also allows them to almost leapfrog expectation in a way, because they're working with next generation technologies to do this. So, the old age of serving bricks with clicks, is kind of what it's called, but following the footsteps of, the likes of Walmart, Target, Macy's, JCPenney, and a number of other retailers who have had to respond to Amazon's speed and convenience benefits. Prime Now is a great example of that. If you don't know of it, it's, a sub 1 hour delivery in New York City. Obviously, New York City has the density, it has the population, and it also has the demand for service, with a retail that accounts for 5% of the total online or total retail trade in the US. But it also gives us a bit of a view into the future as to what's possible. So to respond to that, Zara turned on 2,000 of their stores across 48 countries to fulfill online orders in store. They've even done that in Sydney to the point where you can place an order online at 11:30 p.m. and have it delivered to your desk at 9:30 a.m. That is really a tremendous capability that's enabled through Ship from Store for a brand like Zara. Fast fashion, faster delivery. Obviously, Amazon sets the bar, and by 2021, you know, it's a little known fact, but Amazon will actually open 420 new distribution centers globally. So that's a significant number. But, you know, if you also think about the other emerging trend that we're seeing through the acquisition of Whole Foods, the Amazon Go concept, you know, they're looking at 3,000 cashierless stores as well. So moving into physical retailing is not just going to allow them to have a touch point with the customer that they can come in, touch, feel, and experience the brand. No doubt this will be used in terms of a distributed fulfillment capability. So it's only a matter of time before they are able to better service a customer. You know, Mark, can you share a little bit of insight as to, I guess, what you've enabled in your store locally or your network locally?
Yeah, sure. I think, in fact, in the next couple of slides coming up, it really does unpack what we've done here. But in essence, I mean, if you think about Amazon's globally going to open 420 distribution centers between now and 2022, we've principally opened 450 distribution centers, new distribution centers in the last 12 months. By thinking about our stores not only as experience centers for our customers, but as distribution centers for our product. And that's had a transformative impact in our ability to deliver new and innovative services to customers that is perhaps giving us a competitive advantage to capture more of the demand that exists in market. So, Rob, I don't know if you want to maybe flip to the next slide. So, I suppose if you think about it broadly and using your stores, I mean, Rob cited a great example with Uber Eats, and the reason why they can get shipping costs so low is because they're doing closer. I mean, it's within a geography, it's closest point to customer. The delivery, the last mile delivery is literally a mile in most instances, and so you can get this hyper low cost, fast service kind of running for Uber Eats. And by enabling all of our stores, we too have been able to enable ship from store capability to reduce our shipping costs. But we were unpacking probably a bigger opportunity, and certainly shipping optimization is a huge opportunity for businesses. Anyone that runs an online business knows that it is amongst your largest variable costs. So any way that you can kind of contain that has to be a good thing. But again, we started thinking about this, what other problems we could look to solve, and inventory allocation and inefficiency in that is obviously another great problem. So if you consider broadly that, let's say you could halve your delivery costs by going local from the store closest to the customer, how else could you generate more commercial value? And so where we have inventory allocation rules running for closest point to customer now, the vision that we have for the future of this is we actually want to do inventory allocation rules based on slowest sell-through. So we don't care if we have to ship something from New South Wales to Perth, because we can still do it for a standard, say, flat rate of, call it $12, right? But the improvement in our margin, considering that our first discount is normally, say, around 25%, is that there's roughly a 19% improvement that we can generate by changing the way that we think. Now, that is, to do that, it obviously requires systems that sit behind it to be able to analyze it, and great freight partners that can plug in, that can route those orders and fulfill them in the time period required. On the next slide, we've got a great, there's a one page that really kind of unpacks what that strategy kind of looks like. And I'll get the guys to flip through as I talk, but principally, the way that we started off was we looked at all of the touch points that we had with our customer, both digital and physical, and then the types of physical stores that we had, flagship, metro, and regional. If you just go to the next build out. So often the criticism that exists is that there's silos that exist between physical and digital. But my observation was that there's actually silos that existed within the physical as well. And what I mean by that is that our regional store out in Ballarat that has $150,000 worth of inventory just does not have the same breadth of range or depth of range, for that matter, as our flagship store. So whatever we're talking about online or even in our social media, where you tend to post the, the limited, the exclusive, the hottest product, our regional customers just fundamentally weren't accessing that. Equally online was kind of had this massive pool of traffic, but was only being served up the inventory that we thought it needed at the time, because it's very difficult to test what the upper limits of your website can do without taking a huge punt on inventory. So if you move to the next slide, fundamentally what we did was that we broke down those silos and we connected in real time all of those inventory buckets. So we can mobilize any piece of inventory that we own from any of our brands across any of our channels in real time. So effectively connecting the best part of now $110 odd million worth of inventory and 445 stores. If you click to the next slide, the first innovation that we brought to market was click and collect. This is not groundbreaking, most retailers do it. A lot of retailers surprisingly still send that inventory from their DC, which I think is not only inefficient in terms of inventory utilization, it's also very costly, and it means that customers are often waiting. So to be able to do that in real time is almost an expectation for customer. The next innovation that we brought in was click and dispatch, which is really by plugging in all of those inventory sources that we had for all of our stores into our online catalog. Basically, the visibility of our online store went from a combined value of probably $2 odd million to $110 million overnight, or in the period of time rather that we were able to roll these click and dispatch stores out. And very quickly that accounts for anywhere between 30 to 50% of the total online sales that we generate. And the other way to look at that is that we basically doubled our digital turnover simply by turning and plugging all of this inventory into the system. We were taking advantage of that demand that we had online. Next, we go to making that same capability available in store. So endless aisle is to a store what click and dispatch is to an online store. So if a customer does make the effort to go all the way to your store and they find that they don't have that size 9 in stock, if we own it anywhere in our network, we'll deliver it free of charge to the customer within 2 working days. And what we're seeing is a huge adaptation here of being able to capture the unmet demand that's walking into our stores, and also streamline the very administrative heavy process of doing customer special orders, where you'd have to request it from another store, you'd have to book the transfer to come between the stores, and you have to check it in on the other store, call the customer, get the customer to come back. Now we've eliminated all of that admin and actually delighted the customer, because we can deliver it to them within 2 days and we don't charge them any shipping for that, because that's our bad and we want to make it good. And then the final piece of kind of innovation that we built off the back of that is same-day delivery. And again, by using the store network, we can now, with the power of our inventory accuracy, in addition to the real-time lookup, we can have an order placed online ready to be picked up from courier within 20 minutes of it being placed. And again, if you think about that generation that Rob was talking to before, Generation Z or the millennials, it's the instant gratification generation. So if they see a post online in the morning and can have it on their desk in the afternoon, that's a phenomenal customer proposition. Interestingly, what we're seeing as a result of that is that those customers that use the service typically are stickier with us, because they come back and buy from us again. not necessarily to use the same day service, but because they've had such a good experience, we do see a higher rate of return. If you flip to the next one, that capability is actually a 3-hour service that we're using. We just haven't called it 3 hour because we wanted to make sure we can actually deliver on that proposition. But early in the new year, we will change the branding to a 3-hour delivery service and again, be able to fulfill that right across the country.
Thanks very much, Mark. I mean, look, you know, a couple of, yeah, absolutely a tremendous innovation from the company there, and the capabilities that you now have accessing inventory across all those store locations really allows you to just take advantage of what you already had in the network, right? I think, you know, and this is probably a question for everybody on the webinar, you know, thinking about your own retail operations, you know, I guess looking at this chart, it seems quite simple, but there's so much more here to unpick to actually enable this type of capability. But namely, you know, if you really think about the types of products that you're in and how substitutable they are, obviously footwear is the obvious example where if you don't have the size and style I need, I can't buy from you today. So the importance of having endless aisle in store and being able to meet that unmet demand is so important for a brand like the Athlete's Foot, like Hype, like Platypus. You know, it's almost critical to make the sale. And if I think about, you know, other verticals or segments, you know, baby goods is a really important one where I've got a personal experience in, right? So you want that one stroller or that one pram. I mean, these days there's no desire to wait around for it to be transferred from store A to store B, you know, waiting 4 or 5 business days to then go back into store and complete the transaction. If it's an out of stock scenario in the store, I'm jumping online on my mobile and kind of getting it delivered to my home the next day, and probably for 10% cheaper as well. So you really do need to think about how you're going about meeting that unmet demand in store as it exists. But obviously, Mark, you've made it look really simple to do this. You know, there's a little bit behind getting to this level that I'd like to almost share with everybody on the call. And I often like to talk about the checklist of things that need to be done to almost unify or harmonize the different channels that do exist. So thinking about retailers offline versus online and that silo type of view that Mark shared earlier is really not constructive to today's customer demands. So there are almost, you know, 7 bullet points that we talk to about unifying the channels and actually providing that experience to customer that is absolutely seamless across any touch point. So enabling that, you know, top of funnel discovery all the way to mid funnel, you know, decision-making process online, right the way through to completing the transaction in store. And then in fact, even enabling simplified returns as well. But the first thing is really critical is getting single view of inventory. So if you don't have a single view of inventory across your store network and your DC today, that's the first place to start. But linked to that, and I'm only going to talk to the things that are important to ship from store capability, is inventory accuracy. Mark, do you want to talk to that point a little bit more?
Yeah, this is really the elephant in the room, I suppose, in making this actually work and actually delivering great experience for customer. And I was very fortunate that we have very strong inventory disciplines in our stores. So the starting point for me was that our inventory accuracy on any given stock take was kind of less than half of 1% variance. So within that, we were able to build on that platform. If your inventory accuracy is up towards 2 to 5%, what you're going to find is that the instance of you being able to actually fulfill on that customer once they've placed the order, you're going to be cancelling a lot of orders because you find that the inventory doesn't exist. So inventory accuracy is a pivotal discipline, obviously, in any retail business, from a systems perspective, but also a cultural perspective. There are ways that you can get around that by creating inventory buffers. So you need to have a minimum number of units before you will be able to sell it online. But if you need to kind of revert to those solutions, then you're selling yourself short of the opportunity, because you probably do have the stock, but you're just trying to limit your risk with customers. So inventory accuracy by far and away is the biggest cultural discipline that underpins the success of any of these strategies that we're talking about today.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. I couldn't agree more. And a lot of the retailers that we speak to, providing that single view of inventory, it's a technology problem. Inventory accuracy is a people and process challenge, but it is also a challenge associated with the format of stores, right? It'd be lovely if, well, it wouldn't be lovely if no customers touch the stock that's on the shelves, but clearly when that happens, you do have variances in terms of what you believe to be available in a particular store. So buffers do help, but getting that accuracy level up is almost critical, particularly when things like same day ship from store, come into view. And as we look at compressing the timeline of delivery, understanding, and being absolutely definite that that stock is available in store so as not to disappoint the customer on expectation. So the next piece is really around, enabling click and collect capability on the back of that inventory visibility. So the two methods of click and collect that exist today, one is sending direct from warehouse to store versus in-store fulfillment capability. If you're already doing that today, then you have the capability to ship from store. If the barrier is what shipping system do I use or how do I coordinate that there are a number of solutions that exist. I'm going to be pretty biased as to which one I'd recommend, but then enabling multiple delivery options from that particular store location is really important. I just want to jump onto two questions that have kind of come through from the panel, from the attendees. Thank you very much, firstly, to Mark Lincoln. You asked a question around delivery costs, including costs of labor to pick and pack an order. So on the prior slide that Mark talked to, that example doesn't cover the full cost of picking and packing, but we're going to talk about that in another couple of slides. So bear with us, Mark. The second question from Joe Maxwell was a question for you, Mark. Does Accent Group use RFID to keep on top of inventory accuracy?
No, we don't. We don't use RFID. We have fairly regular cycle counts within our stock, and we are about to implement full EDI end-to-end across the business, which should again tighten it up again. But it's really process that has enabled us to, and discipline that's enabled us to achieve those results. Technology's been a little bit behind on that front for us.
As it would be in many retailers across Australia, Mark. So it's the next sort of big space of innovation as we see it. I'll keep moving. So obviously a lot of this doesn't come without cost. So I want to walk through a few considerations around investment. So investment around a couple of key areas to enable these capabilities is obviously Mark's talked at length around inventory accuracy and visibility. Obviously there are some decent costs associated with this, and this is a foundational building block that really is critical for business in today's era. Second piece is order management. So investing in some type of system or platform, or even investing in your own point of sale capabilities to understand how to orchestrate, the order fulfillment process. So, Mark, I believe you work quite closely with Fluent Retail in terms of understanding where to dispatch orders from.
Yeah, we do. So I might start off by saying that, within our suite of brands, we are still running a couple of different ERP systems. So check with your ERP provider if they actually have the capability built in. We were fortunate that for a number of our brands, order orchestration was part of the native platform. In a couple of our other brands where we didn't have that capability, we have partnered with Fluent as a third-party provider to orchestrate that order management tool for us.
Yeah, and I would say, really investigate with your current ERP/POS provider as to whether they have those capabilities today. We work quite closely with Apparel 21, as an integration partner, and they've got tremendous capability in terms of fulfillment logic within the platform that's already there. So definitely investigate capabilities. Second piece is around POS updates. So obviously there are two ways to do this in terms of enabling that shipping from store capability. One is to use some type of portal to book freight, from an aggregator website or from a courier website direct. Obviously that is time and resource intensive. The best in class applications that we've seen have really come out of direct integration into POS. So it's just like fulfilling a click and collect order, or it's just like completing a transaction at the till, except what gets spit out is literally a shipping label on a receipt, or even on a separate printer. And that kind of dovetails nicely into the next point, which is obviously capital expenditure on hardware in stores. So there are a multitude of ways to get around this. So one is, putting a printer in every store. When you really think about the savings you're going to generate, it is not the biggest problem. But if you're thinking about speed of rollout and kind of maximizing that efficiency, you can also use your humble receipt printer with a solution like Shippit to produce shipping labels on the docket. So there's no need to really change up the physical hardware that's in store. It's just about providing the shipping satchels and boxes to store, and there are ways to make that look lovely as well. Mark, did you have anything else to add on this particular slide?
No, just reinforce the point around CapEx. I know in organisations, particularly in retail, that everyone's very cautious around CapEx spend. It's the efficiency that you will deliver by investing in the right hardware here will pale in comparison to the cost of investing in a proper label printer. And if you set your teams up properly, what you'll find is that your service delivery will only improve. So our attitude was give our teams the tools that they needed to deliver great experience. And really the investment is a rounding error in the value that it creates.
Thanks for the perspective there, Mark. So there are two methods, to the ship from store model or providing endless aisle. So you could look to roll out a superstore fulfillment model, which is where you have a handful of feeder stores, which are a subset of your entire store network. We're seeing a trend that works quite well for either really expensive stock or stock that is uniform or relatively lightweight. So you can consolidate from centralized hubs or centralized holding areas. And then it also means that you can prioritize stores with a larger retail footprint. So you do have the space for pick and pack if it needs its own kind of domain. The second model that we're seeing is distributed fulfillment. And this is where all stores within the network are capable and do all fulfillment, just like the example that Mark shared earlier. And that's great for retailers that actually have a long tail of SKUs to sell. So where endless aisle is absolutely critical to unlock all of that. So footwear is a great example. High-end fashion with Q is another great example of that. And it's also great for bulky or heavy goods, because no doubt the shipping cost of getting an item across one side of the country to another is exorbitantly high, whereas the cost of a local delivery is much more affordable. A lot of times, retailers tend to be quite hesitant to roll this out. The argument is obviously, but I need space to sell rather than space to fill orders in store. There are examples from across the US, like Crate and Barrel, which I always kind of bandy about, which actually celebrates the fact that they fulfill from store. It is that blending of channel and also almost advertising to the customer that they don't have to be in the physical store to actually receive an order from that particular store. And so it kind of goes to that provenance, localized, trend as well. This is an example of Crate and Barrel where they're actually celebrating the fact that they do fulfillment in store by integrating it completely into their, checkout counter. Last point is there are a whole bunch of myths around ship from store capability. So, that question on, obviously the cost of pick and pack is much higher in a store versus a warehouse. And there are 4 key myths that we want to almost debunk on this call, which is cultural alignment is one of the biggest things that needs to be undertaken as part of this journey. So, you often have oppositionary sort of viewpoints from a retail operations perspective through to a digital perspective, almost coming from the legacy to the new age. Mark, do you want to share, how to get around that or how important at least that is?
Yeah, look, principally what we've done here is make sure that if a store is fulfilling the order, the store is rewarded with the sale. And so what we've done by doing that is made sure that there is complete alignment with the store operations team, and that they see an online customer in exactly the same way as they see an in-store customer. There's no second-class system that we have created. So to get around that, we do pro forma reporting internally to say, well, what was the contribution of total digital to the business? But in terms of pure financial reporting, we will reward the store with that sale. Now, something to be aware of and certainly be mindful of, if you are on turnover rents, you know, does that drive up your turnover rent? Does it inflate how well your store is actually performing? Absolutely, it does. But I think in terms of being transparent with landlords around the fact that this is the value that you are dispatching from their store, which they are providing absolutely no value to, that there are, you know, there's dialogue and conversations that can be had there if you are on turnover rent. I'm certainly not suggesting that they are allowing tenants to back it out at this stage, but we're certainly pushing very hard for that point. So the cultural alignment piece, both from an operational perspective and a team perspective in store, is really critical in getting it to work seamlessly. Otherwise, if you do create a second-class customer, the service delivery will actually be worse than what you are delivering today.
Thanks, Mark. And I guess there's also that question specifically around, you know, using a retail footprint is obviously higher cost per square meter than, say, a DC out in the boondocks would be. Do you want to share some perspective on how to view the cost associated with this type of fulfillment? You know,
yeah, sure. I think you know, if you consider a lease, it's a fixed lease, right? So it's a fixed cost, and it's almost a sunk cost. So to the extent that you have these locations that are operating and you can utilize the space, then it's costing you no more. Your fixed cost base doesn't go up. You then need to look at your variable costs. So then you start to look at, well, what is the cost of actually picking and packing and fulfilling those orders? What I think is interesting about the online space, and I am talking specifically about footwear, is that you do see a lot of, you know, almost 50% of transactions actually happen after hours. So by the time someone comes into store first thing in the morning, most of the orders that they need to pack are actually already waiting for them. And as anyone knows who's in the retail space, you know, your first hour of the day is often your quietest, and it is when you try and do your admin. So the view that we've kind of taken here is that we don't believe that it is adding any material increase in variable costs from a wages perspective. The caveat to that is when you have big events like Afterpay Day or Click Frenzy that's coming up, where your volumes will materially increase. And of course, there will be incremental costs there, but they're variable costs, right? And it's the cost of fulfilling that order. So if you're using your stores as ship from store and your warehouse is still your default location, effectively, if orders are going to your stores, they're orders that you would not have otherwise been able to fulfill, in which case, you know, the variable wage cost that you have to layer onto it, you're more than willing to pay because it's net incremental. And that's pretty much how we've kind of looked at it. Where you need to be careful, though, is when you're looking at, you know, lease renewals or reporting to landlords, being very transparent and upfront about where the performance is being driven from. And you're not kidding yourselves into, you know, thinking that you need a bigger store when in actual fact you actually might need to downsize your store at your next lease renewal.
We've actually seen, you know, that point being embraced, Mark, where some retailers are actually reevaluating the need for a DC or a centralized warehouse. You know, obviously their fulfillment models differ somewhat, but, you know, moving that fulfillment and dispatch of online orders, you know, 100% to stores is something that we're actually seeing across more and more retailers these days as well. So in actuality, they're making stores work harder, so sweating the assets that already exist versus adding the additional cost of a DC for online fulfillment. The last piece is inventory planning. So often there's a rebuttal to this to say, well, you're just going to deplete my top performing stores of my top performing SKUs. You know, so there is a need to work around and think not necessarily around what is the demand for inventory from that particular store anymore. It actually changes in terms of what is the aggregate demand of items across the network, right, Mark?
Yeah, I think this is another one where there's a cautionary tale here. If all of your planning is done based on your financial reporting lens, which is where did I fulfill that sale from, then what your planning team is going to think is that those stores actually require more stock. So if you're running a DC, that's not in fact the case. What you should be using is that intelligence that, you know, your click and dispatch, your endless aisle reporting to actually help tune your allocation strategy, making sure that you do actually allocate the product to where it needs to be based on where the customer is purchasing it from you, as opposed to where you choose to report where that sale was actually incurred.
Awesome perspective, Mark, and I think, you know, sort of learning from the trenches as well. So that's almost a key watch out as we really start to think about the shift in mindset as you start to roll out new technologies as well, and how it impacts the standard process that you've been familiar with. We'll move on to the final module, which finally hands the mic over to you, the audience, to ask questions. I've got a few that have banked up, so we will get to those. But before we do, I just want to talk to the benefit. So if it hasn't really been, if the concept of ship from store and endless aisle hasn't really been sold to you yet, hopefully these next few charts will help you get pushed over the edge. So these are the results specific to the Accent Group that have been shared publicly. You know, Mark, do you want to add any color to this and kind of what's actually been the outcome of all of this hard work for you?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we've been very public in, through the publishing of our results to share some of this stuff. So what I'm sharing with you is publicly available. But certainly over the course of the last couple of years, we have achieved digital growth in excess of 100% comp year on year. That's excluding acquisition. So, you know, the innovation that we are driving here is allowing us to grow much faster than the market. So if you consider that online retail is growing, depending on category, but somewhere between 10 and 15% in comp terms, we are outperforming that by, you know, some order of magnitude, probably 8 to 10 times the market. So what does that mean? Well, I think fundamentally it means we're taking share away from our competitors because we are able to take more of that demand off the table. That innovation, you know, continues to kind of drive, you know, our next leap forward. So now that we've got all of these foundations, how else can we use them? We continue to turn on more and more of our stores into these distribution centers. It's been a fantastic way to help us liquidate stock faster, you know, support margin improvement, which again we've been quite public with in terms of our results when we published to market. So you know, the commercial case really stacks up. I'm not sure if there's any financial people on the line, but if you're dealing with CFOs and CEOs for that matter, you know, this is one test case where you can talk that there is a direct one-to-one link between providing better experience and better financial outcomes.
Thanks for sharing that, Mark. And I think we're seeing very similar results, even from early stage retailers that have rolled out endless aisle. You know, some examples where digital sales are up 180% as a result of availing the inventory. You know, so that's almost doubling the digital channel. And also increasing conversion. So 70% increase in conversion is another statistic which gets bandied about from some of our other clients, which indicates that unmet demand being met is really just money in the bank rather than sitting in a competitor's bank account as well. So a bit of a no-brainer on that front. And finally, you know, if we kind of really do round it out, the benefits are two key things. One is a superior customer experience through low cost, faster deliveries, and availability really. And the third thing is boosting revenue and profitability through greater conversion and selling more product at full price. So that really is the case for really changing the role of the physical store and bringing it into that digital mindset. If Paul were on the call, I'm sure he'd be pushing his phygital, you know, term. But that really is what we're seeing coming together here in a very powerful way. I want to thank Mark for sharing his insight But Mark and I would be very happy to use the last few minutes of the call to answer any questions that you may have. So one of the questions that did come through from David Strangis, sorry if I've pronounced the name wrong, David, but if offered as a free service, what percentage of stock is returned as either the wrong size or change of mind? And is this a constant or dropping trend as people better understand their requirements? Mark, can you share any perspective?
Yeah, we've taken a very different approach to probably the US retailers, which were, almost over encouraging people to order in 8, 8.5, and 9, and then send back whatever they didn't like. You can do that in the US because the cost of logistics is just a fraction of what it is in Australia. So we've invested in tools that help customers find the size that they need, either based on something that they own today, or trying to find, match their shoe needs. So a footwear finder in the athlete's foot, for argument's sake. So we enjoy, low single-digit kind of return rates across the online business, but we encourage customers to use our multi-channel opportunities. So we encourage customers to go in store, try things on, exchange in store, return in store for that matter. If a customer is returning in store as opposed to returning online, there's less freight costs. There's a higher chance of us being able to turn that into an exchange rather than a return. And that's why, one of the other topics around cultural alignment, so important to kind of consider.
Thanks, Mark. Another question's come through from Henry Ewan, who said, we weren't aware that any same-day delivery options were available for Melbourne via Shippit. Has this changed? The short answer is it hasn't changed, but it is available. I would say the current supply capability we have through Bonds Express isn't as effective as the options that exist across Sydney, Brisbane, and a number of other sort of locations, but we're doubling down on on-demand integrations, and you'll actually see a raft of new next-generation carriers available on our platform over the coming weeks, which I'm pretty excited to share. Sorry, that didn't come from Henry. That came from someone else who I'm not sure. But the next question was from Henry. Hi, are shopping centres happy for couriers to be picking up parcels frequently from a store? And are individual pickups cheaper, more cost effective than a bulk pickup from a DC? So I can handle the first part of the question, and then maybe, Mark, if you want to round it out with your experience. I'm also conscious of time, so stay with us if you can. But what we've noticed is shopping centres don't necessarily have an opinion about this. It is really the courier companies and the store staff who have a very significant opinion about this. And getting the pickup correct at a store level is absolutely critical to making this successful. If you think about a 30-minute on-demand delivery, from Bondi Junction, Westfield, in a store that's a needle in a haystack, a courier who's never been to it before, you've got a recipe for disaster. So we're actually working on a few initiatives with some of the large landlords in market to centralize courier pickup capabilities. So just like a centralized dock for transfers and kind of, receiving and outgoing goods in a center, we're looking at doing that just for business to consumer freight. So a little bit like how Uber Eats accesses the food hall floors of a retail center. In terms of being cheaper or more cost effective than bulk pickup from a DC, if you're looking at cross-city couriers, they don't charge a pickup fee. If you are looking at some of the larger incumbents, there may be a pickup fee associated, but we're now seeing that starting to change as well, because it also incentivizes greater efficiency for networks if it can be delivered within the local vicinity as well. Hope that answers the question, Henry. If there are no other questions, I guess I'll close by saying thank you very much for being a very insightful speaker, Mark, and I really appreciated you sharing your journey with us. And thank you to the NORA team for putting this webinar together, and for everybody else who's taken an hour out of their day to join us. Brittany, I'll probably hand it back over to you, unless, Mark, you've got any closing comments.
No, that's all for me. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks everybody for joining today. So a massive thank you to Shippit for sponsoring this webinar and to both our speakers, Rob and Mark. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, and see you on our next weekly webinar. Thanks.
Thank you very much. See ya.
Yeah.